This episode of the podcast has been brought to you by Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is an inclusive, socially conscious PR collective that puts their money where their mouth is. They have a current roster of bands that reads like a greatest hits anthology. Brainiac, Catholic School, Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Oceans in the Sky. I mean, the list goes on and on. They also do PR for record labels such as A La Carte, Arctic Rodeo, Steadfast, Rad Girlfriend, and so many more. How do they pay it forward? How do they put their money where their mouth is? By generating thousands of dollars in annual charitable donations to the likes of Women in Vinyl, Coalition of Communities of Color, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and many, many more. The man has the receipts. I've seen them. It is real. The artists, labels, and podcasts Sweet Cheetah works with are curated with an eye on working primarily with friends. You could find Sweet Cheetah on all of the social media platforms, be it Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just look for Sweet Cheetah PR and they will be there. He's been Tim, I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I am your host, Peter, and I am still here. Tonight on the show, I'm ecstatic to bring to you Duncan Barlow, coming on to the podcast for the second time. Duncan's an old friend from many, many years back. Duncan, you know him from Endpoint, you know him from By the Grace of God, the Aussie Lake. But he was in a little band after Endpoint called Step Down. Step Down then became the experimental, the heavy, the thinking man's heavy hardcore band, as I'd like to call them, Guilt. And tonight on the show, it's not only Duncan. We are joined by the wonderful Ashley State. You know Ashley from Guilt, from one of my all-time favorite bands, Ink and Dagger, and from another one of my all-time favorite bands, Elliot, the grand, beautiful, stunning, melodic Elliot. They're both here tonight to talk about one thing and one thing only. That is the remastered reissue of the seminal 90s hardcore masterpiece that came out on Victory Records and is now being reissued on Mind Over Matter Records. That album, folks, is called Bardstown Ugly Box. I have a picture of myself taken in front of the piece of multimedia sculpture that is made up of dental molds and the like that had been hanging in Duncan's apartment. It's on the back cover of the original record. This album, all titled after Greek letters. This is, just as Synesthesia had been before it, named. The song names were thematic. The record slightly thematic, slightly conceptual, but in all honesty, they're all different stories, different themes. Meditations on loss, on anger, frustration, existential dread. What do you know? These were the records in the 90s that really captured the zeitgeist of my own personal experience as a teenager and 20-something-year-old trying to navigate into adulthood and being frustrated, disillusioned, depressed, carrying my addictions and traumas with me into adulthood. And no better soundtrack can be created for that state of being than records by the likes of Guilt, Dead Guy, Starkweather, Bloodlet, Neurosis. And then later I started to mellow out a little bit, but at that point in my life, this was the perfect music. At this point in my life, this is the perfect music. although I'm on the other side of a lot of that emotional torment, this music still inspires me to want to be something more. That angst it provides such a drive for me. And I hope you glean that from this music and from this interview. Please like, rate, subscribe. Whatever you have to do, go on my Instagram, share my stuff. I appreciate you. I love you all. I don't want to take too much time away from this interview and this experience because I love Guilt so damn much. My top 5 favorite bands of that era, hands down. I'm going to give you a little piece of my favorite song off of this record, and then we will get over to the interview. So I give to you Ashley and Duncan of Guilt on the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Ashley, I'm so sorry.
Oh my gosh, it's okay. What's happening?
How are you?
I'm doing well.
I don't think I've seen you since you were in Ink and Dagger. Like way back when, you know?
Yeah, that was forever ago. Seems like it anyway.
Sure. I mean, and you know, be that as it were, it was all good music. You know what I mean? You were always involved in something good, so all of my memories of your musical input or output, as it were always phenomenal.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm sure Duncan is just really happy with me right now, but...
Oh, it's fine. Neither one of us were mad. It's just funny because you said, if you have any questions, let me know. And then it wasn't until I was sitting here like an hour ago and I was like, Duncan, wait a minute. He said 6 Central and 8 Eastern. I don't know what is it? Which one is it? And I don't know. And then I had all these questions. I was like, I shouldn't sit outside with birds chirping, should I? And he's like, probably not a good idea. And I was like, okay, I'll go inside. So.
You know, that would have worked just fine. I've been recording a lot of episodes under duress very recently, like bands like where there's more than one person involved in the podcast. One person's in a really controlled environment, the other is like on a video shoot on his phone and clipping every 16 seconds. And somehow I made that work too. So
well, then you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. Whatever makes you comfortable is good. So like, have you still been involved with music at all? Or did you kind of like,
Yeah, actually I was doing a band here called Kamess, but then pandemic hit and things just kind of fell apart after that. And everybody's gone on to do other things. And then last year, I don't know if you're familiar with Elliot.
Oh, very, very.
I went and did a stint with them last year. It was about 10 shows, and that was a lot of fun. But right now, not really doing anything. Hi, Duncan.
Hey, Duncan.
Hey, how are you guys?
Fabulous. Look at that wall of power behind you.
Oh yeah, Duncan. I'm sorry.
Much better than mine.
I'm sorry, Duncan. I'm sorry, Duncan.
Oh no, it's fine. We're even now.
Yeah, now we're even. We're very even. Yeah. Well, we were just kind of catching up on what Ashley's been up to since, you know, Guilt and then Ink and Dagger and all of that. You know.
Sorry.
Oh, look at this.
This is Toby. This is Colonel Toby Hooper.
Where's this chainsaw?
Yeah, right.
And you know, it dawned on me right now too, the amount of time that has transpired from the original release of Bardstown to now. It's not quite 30 years, it's 28 years, but what was the catalyst that said like, okay, now at this time period is the time for us to finally bring this forth? Is it the fact that Victory is completely and utterly in flames, or?
No, actually. So without getting into the legal stuff, I just kind of, with the pandemic, and I just had the time to hire a lawyer and get the sort of the rights back to all the bands that I had been in from the people holding them. So it really had to do with time. And I think it's right around the time Victory sold to Concord. So it just all kind of was the right timing to do it. And nobody, I mean, we weren't like a big seller, right? We weren't like Thursday. So it wasn't like a fight.
Well, maybe not, but like, if you could see it through the lens that like my contemporaries and I had seen Guilt through, this was like, you take bands like Neurosis, for as embattled as they sadly are currently. We just lost Ashley.
I think we did.
For all of these bands, your Neurosis, your Bloodlet, Your Dead Guy. Like, Guilt was always right in line with all of those bands that just so happened to be on Victory Records at one point or another. So although you're seeing it as not a big seller, none of those bands really were, but they're all staples, right?
Dead Guy sold pretty well. Dead Guy did pretty well.
That may be true, but that's probably had more to do with the fact that they were a flash in the pan kind of band, just like Gorilla Biscuits or any of the other like really classic hardcore bands who had a 7-inch or maybe a record and a 7-inch. You know, Guilt stuck around a little bit longer than that, having had, you know, an EP, then a full length, then another EP, and then, you know, gone. But still, who was really a massive band on there besides Thursday and the couple like emo whatever bands that happened after that whole first thrust of Victory? Not very many, right? But they're all considered classics. Guilt is definitely considered a classic. Otherwise, Austin wouldn't have put it out, period. You know, like obviously it's viable, but like looking back that 28 years later, and like the incredible shows you guys would put on that were very tribal events, you know, with almost like drum circles going on stage and things of that matter. How does that like strike you now, being we're all of a certain age and hearkening back to that? Do you think it's reinvigorating your lust for this music that you'd created way back when?
That's a really good question. I don't know, Ashley. How do you feel? I mean, it's right. It's a weird. It's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I'm not. I want to say first that I missed the whole first thing that you said, Duncan, because I lost my connection. But I'm back now. But the question: are you saying? I don't know how to answer that exactly.
Is it making you fall in love all over again with this music that you'd created 28 years ago? Like, are you finding like a recognition of the counterpoint of your younger self with the person you are now via this vehicle of the music coming to the fore again and being remastered and reinvigorated?
I'm wow. I'm sorry. My nerves just went. I was like, I'm not going to be any help during this podcast, Duncan. There's so many things to say.
Yeah. I think, so let me back that up a little bit, because I think it's exciting to get back into those songs, and to give them to Steve Evans, who I've always really loved the way he mixes. We had talked to a couple people. Ken Andrews from Failure was one of them, who I really admire.
Oh yeah.
And just you have these tapes, and the recording of that was really rough for us. We had to leave before we mixed it, because my mom was dying.
Yeah.
And I think Bob caught really great tones. And so there was this whole process of, first we had to transfer these old tapes to digital. So they had to be baked.
Baked them up, yeah.
Right. Because they're post, they're of an era where they stopped using whale blubber to bind tape. And so then Alan Duchess transferred them, and they sent them off to Steve. And I had no idea really what to expect. You know, there was only like, Kyle and I only did singular guitar tracks. Whereas on other records, we beeped them up. And let's face it, like, Ashley's bass on that first version is non-existent. It's a little whisper. And so the first song that he tried came in, and I quickly sent it to everybody, and I was blown away, right? I don't know, Ashley, how did you feel when that first song came in?
The first song, like the first time we recorded it? Is that
No, the remix.
Yeah,
oh, the remix? Oh, wow. It was night and day. It was without saying anything negative, when I listened to the first time we recorded it, it was just I was disappointed. It was lackluster. It was I think now, although who wouldn't love to go back and just completely redo everything they played, because I'm in such a different place now musically and with where I am being an adult and a little more grown up and caring a little more. Would love to redo all that, but having the remix, it's like finally has like that meat to it that I always wanted. Is just, and that's what's exciting about it, is like, oh, finally it's got some grit and it's got some like heaviness. And that was, for me personally, that's my liking, is for it to be heavier and grittier and just in your face rather than so even toned. And so that part of it is exciting for me, and it does get me invigorated, like, yeah, let's go play this show, and now we've got this recording out. And yeah, I don't know, I'm much happier. Like when I heard the first one, I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's awesome, that's what we've been looking for, cool. So.
Yeah,
When Duncan first sent me these versions of the record, which was a while ago now at this point, I could hear the room for the first time on the record. And the room's always, people don't understand how important the room you're recording in is to the actual product that comes through, and you could get a better sense of that room that you guys are recording in, the depth of it. It's almost as if it got stripped of a certain spirit upon the initial release. Duncan, I think you may remember me telling you that the cassette was the only mix of Bardstown that sounded good when it came out. The cassette sounded good. The cassette sounded better than the CD and the vinyl. It's a weird thing. I don't know how that translates. Maybe it's just because of the medium, but I always preferred to listen to that cassette version of it for some odd reason. When you go back though, like, those tracks have a certain flow that didn't get lost, which was the best part of that record, was the way it flowed together originally. That doesn't get lost in this new mix, but what does come through is that bottom end, but also it's probably the most miserable, I think, Guilt record.
Well, we were all pretty miserable at the time, except for Kyle. Kyle's always happy.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, he was probably miserable because of us, but
probably.
But I mean, you bring up, it's an interesting thing because, I had this really just wildly unchecked depression. I think I was just starting to come to terms with that. This thing was there. And I was coming apart. And by the time we did Further, I was just, the hinges were off. I was coming apart. And you would go on these tours, and like the one we did with Earth Crisis, of course, was great. And then we had that miserable 96 tour where, the band just dissolved in the weirdest way. And so, Ashley and I like had this love-hate relationship in our band, because I would be like, I would just do shit and not check with anybody. And she was like, what the fuck?
Well, and I had no composure or poise. I would just lose my shit, like, rah, and I mean, it was it was hard at the time, but it also seemed appropriate. Like that band, that's what it was. It was just, we were all like, well, I say we were all, but I really think it seems more like Duncan and I were the ones who were both having our own, like, just craziness going on. And it made for a very interesting dynamic. But without getting too lost and off topic, I think something that you said a little bit ago is really kind of what I was getting at with that album. Is it felt flat to me, and there was so much emotion going on, and there's so much emotion in the songs, and I feel like that's kind of what got lost, like the dynamics and the the feelings of the things like that Duncan was going through. I can't speak for him, but then also at that point in my life, I was just raging in so many ways, like alcoholism and just debilitating insecurity and whatever. And so all of this, I think that really played into the dynamics in the band. And I feel like that's kind of what got lost in the recording was, the emotion and the feelings and the rawness. It felt very flat to me when I heard that. I hope I'm not way off.
No.
No. It was very two-dimensional. And this was not, I actually write about this in the liner notes of Bardstown Ugly Box. Is like this, I do this brief history, but it's not Bob's fault because Bob was an excellent engineer. It's we were trying to do this thing at the time of like, let's bridge those like indie rock things we love with metal, which we didn't really see. Maybe it was like with Hum or something, but like not a lot of bands were doing it. But what we really needed was a producer. And we didn't really think about it too much. We were just kind of like, we want that Albini kind of drum sound. And so, Bob had this impossible task of us him kind of doing things and us like not knowing what to say or do in the situation. And then, I get a call about my mom and I'm like, hey guys, I got to go home. We pack up early and we leave. And after a while, it was just like, in hindsight, what we should have done, because this was supposed to be such a big breakthrough record for us, because that was our victory, was at their peak. And, and I'm sure if even Tony would have suggested this, I would have probably just been object to it because I was so objected to everything at the time. But we should have given it to a producer to mix, right? A mixer or something. And we didn't. So we just kind of, the record looks beautiful, but it was two-dimensional. I still would love more guitar tracks on there. And a second vocal track.
There's a charm to these things that like sonically you're bemoaning, and I get that, but for the time period and for the impact that this record had on as many people as I'm still connected to that were listening to it back then, we all feel the same way about this specific record. There's something almost nihilistic in its beauty and also very unified in vision. I mean, like, just take, for example, the fact that everything is in Greek numeric or Greek letters, and everything, just as Synesthesia had been, it follows a theme that's almost obtuse or perfunctory. It doesn't totally make sense to the content, but it gives it a meter and a scale. It gives you a through line, something like a map to go by. But it's still this spiral and very epic in scope as well. The fact that there are these pratfalls of production, like thinness in production or mixing is a little bit thin. There's still something conceptually that is so robust about this record that people still remember it and still have an affinity for it. You have to kind of see that it still resonates with people, right?
I mean, I see that and I hear people saying that. I think my perception of things at the time really, it really just dampened what I perceived other people to think about our music, I guess. Because I was in such a space that even hearing you say now, like that, how impactful it was or what have you, I'm like, what? Come on now. No, it wasn't. But I get excited. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But I don't think I was aware of that at the time or even now. It's just like I said, like hearing people say that, I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Awesome. Let's do it again. Let's go. I don't know. Yeah.
It's Ashley, do you remember this? We would roll up to like these hardcore fests and we'd see the people up front and we could always identify like 2 or 3 were like, those are the Guilt people. Like we knew who, we could just see them because they were just like everybody else was like in jerseys and stuff. Yes. And then there's these just like sort of awkward nerdy kids and we're like, oh, they're here for us.
Yep. I definitely remember rolling up to shows and being like, yeah, they're not here to see us. They came because we're on Victory and then they're going to walk away as soon as we start playing.
I was the guy with the long hair with the Neurosis t-shirt on. He was like still a hardcore kid, but like, I'm metal too. That I was definitely the Guilt audience. And Duncan, I almost wore the long sleeve version of the t-shirt you're wearing right now.
Yeah, I realized
because of the sleeves. Isn't that what you said?
There's a whole like kind of subgenre of the whole Victory hardcore thing that you guys were the leaders of and exemplified, and the Dead Guys and the Kiss It Goodbyes and even like bands like Starkweather, you all inhabited that space that, it was really aggressive, metallic, tinged music that was safe for hardcore kids to be cool with because you weren't Heshers, but you were still, you still took metal and made it as Sabbathy as humanly possible for hardcore punk kids. That doesn't make sense to people now. It really doesn't, because there are far less boundaries for the independent music lover in this day and age, just like everything else that I think is really great about this generation, like how they feel about the way they identify with gender and the like. I think these young people have it all over who we were as young people, even though we're all for it and champions of it. They don't care about genre anymore. Back then, to go against something that's very codified and very rigid, I think that was almost very kind of brave of you guys to strike out on the path you had after Duncan with Endpoint, to come into something like Guilt and to, make a grand statement like that, I think was very powerful. The initial intention of what you were doing with Guilt, what did that look like? Like, what was the initial thought when you guys got together and said, okay, this is what we're going to do?
My original vision for it was actually, I came up with the original idea on the Guilt Catharsis tour. And I was pretty, I think that was the first time I was ever experiencing depression, so I didn't really know what the feeling was. And I remember just drawing the logo on CBGB's door. Mm-hmm. And somebody was like, what is that? I was like, I don't know. It's something I'm thinking about. And when I came back, I met up at, I don't even know if you know this, Ashley, John Cook and I got together and he was playing drums and I was showing him these riffs I had. And he was like, yeah, man. And I go, and I'm thinking about making all the songs colors. And he was like, oh, yeah, man. And then he just, flaked, and so I just kind of put together the closest people who were in Step Down. And Lee was like, no part of this left. And eventually Christian left. And I'd known Ashley since like 87, 88 or something. Mm-hmm. And she was in a band called Snake Eater. And I saw them play and I said, I just went up and I was like, "Hey, Ashley, you want to be in a band?" And that was her band, right? With Matthew Renee. Matthew is like a really well-established artist now. His work is amazing.
That was Telephone Man with Matt.
Telephone Man. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, Snake Eater was before Telephone Man.
That with Sean from Undermine?
Sean McLaughlin, yeah.
Evergreen.
Mm-hmm.
God, Louisville is incestuous.
Yes, very.
Very, but that's there's something in the water with that whole scene you guys were involved with, because you get Elliot from it, you get Guilt, you get By the Grace of God, you get all of these really important bands coming out of like this relatively smaller area. It's not like New York City. Louisville, it's a big town, but it's compared to New York or LA, that's just it's a microcosm. I don't know how to quantify how important that whole Initial Records Louisville thing was, but it even the Metro Shifter just had like such a wide reach, carved a large swath through our music scene. What was youth like growing up in a scene that was that kind of like nationally important?
Oh man.
I don't think any of us, I gotta be honest, none of us fucking cared.
Right.
In that way, I think, right? Like, because we were such a weird scene, like, and the punk scene was always very active there and kind of renowned for, Discord had even talked to Malignant Growth about working with them. And doing like a kind of split release like they did with, I think, I can't remember, Necros or somebody. They did something. My memory's bad on that. But so we had these great bands we grew up with that we all were friends with and we loved. They were like our big brothers in a way, big sisters as well. And but like, we are still neglected. Louisville still, like, sure, people talk about Slent till the cows come home, but in this world of like hardcore or emo, the conversation never comes to the Midwest. You hear about New York, you hear about California, you don't hear about, the bands, you don't hear about Elliot Falling Forward, you don't hear about Split Lip, right? In these things, it's completely ignored. And the emo thing, really, it just misses that link between Rites of Spring and Braid, right? They just skip right over what happened in between.
But the Midwest is to my mind, the most fertile breeding ground of what is, like, just forget the whole emo thing, but independent music from like Slint across the board. Like, you don't get most of these bands that really changed the face of the culture and informed the sound that resonated to either coast without the Midwest. The Midwest is kind of like where it really happened. You don't get Crank Records. You don't get, Mineral. You don't get any of that without the Midwest. The East Coast, and I'm from the East Coast, you get tough guy hardcore. You get a little bit of death metal. The West Coast, you get like the really like poppy indie rock and the really crazy hardcore. Everything interesting that truly came to the fore in the late 80s and early 90s came from the Midwest. And you could really blame Louisville, Kentucky, and Columbus, Ohio for a great majority of those sounds. I could make that argument till the cows come home, but if you look at the amount of people and their proximity to these two locations, to the people who come on my podcast, they're either from Ohio or Kentucky. So that tells you where my heart was at that time period, So when I ask, like, I'm not asking what it meant to you to be in a renowned scene at that time period, but how did it feel like to have that charge of creative invigoration surrounding you by these bands that were your friends, your peers, the people you aspired to just like stand shoulder to shoulder with, because there was a lot going on.
Stump.
Or I'm just being too obtuse. I don't know.
No.
I guess when I think back, I don't think I was aware of. I just remember it being exciting, and like when I first started going to shows, I didn't care what genre it was. I went to every show I could go to, no matter what. And that's also when the bill would have like polar opposite bands. I mean, you could have one band that's over here and this side, and it was they bands just got put together on a bill, and it made it fun. And you would see, to me, it seemed like I knew, these people are kind of into this and these people are into this, but we would see them all at the same shows, like back in my younger days. And it felt like as I got older, that's when everything started to really go into like, well, that's a hardcore show. I'm not going to that because I'm the artsy guy over here who's, listening to Rodin or this or that and the other. But it seemed like in the past, like we all went to the same shows, and it was really fun, and it was really exciting. And I mean, of course, the youth thing was in there too, but I don't know. I just remember it being really fun and really exciting. I don't think I was aware of how broad the range of music was that we were, that was here. And I loved it. I wish it was still that way. Even though I still I see whatever bands I want to see now, but yeah, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to wander and ramble.
That's what the show's for.
That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, that's where all the good stuff goes down.
No, I tend to just talk in circles without saying anything.
I did an episode with Duncan not that long ago. I released about 2 hours of it, but I think there's almost like close to 4 hours of discussion there.
Oh, wow.
And the pre-written questions that I'd asked, I'd thrown out, because the magic happened when Duncan and I just started to free associate and like really talk about what makes us happy about life, what makes us love literature and poetry and music and art and expression. Because in all reality, it's not about like what scene you come from or what what you associate yourself with as a codified genre or what have you. What it really comes down to is what this music made you feel then, and does it still translate to now? 90% of the time, yes, it probably still does. Guilt meant something to me when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. I'm going to be 47. Guilt still means the same things for the same reasons, because the art was sincere. It wasn't, trying to be something, putting on airs, like coming out there like, we're all going to rehearse our moves and we're going to mosh in unison. And we're like, nobody was getting hard. Nobody was like, talking about their lifestyles. It wasn't that kind of trip. It was art. Art is eternal. Art will always be art. Mm-hmm. Trying to be, a straight edge vegan, opinion for whatever you stand for, that's probably not going to make sense to you 20 years from now. But if you express something that is meaningful and reverberates through time, like we're still reading, the Iliad now. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because it's an expression. It's not politics. It's not someone trying to force their ideals upon you. they're expressing an emotion and a feeling, and emotions, feelings, expressions, and art will always resonate throughout time. That was the true strength, I think, of what Guilt had done. Just my opinion.
Thank you. I think in response to that, for me, it's funny when you talk about like rehearsing your moves and doing all. I think, and I go back to this, and I get mad at myself every time I do an interview because I'm like, I'm not going to talk about my emotional problems that I had, you know. But honestly, in Guilt, that was, I mean, it was the height of it, and you know, that eventually led to a lot of things that made me change my life and the way I was living, which I'm very thankful for. But even like when I looked, I couldn't think. I had so much going on mentally and emotionally, and was in so much like emotional pain at the time that I wasn't fully aware of. I couldn't think about, okay, what move am I going to make? What am I going to, you know, I played music because I wanted to play music. I didn't think about what kind of band Guilt was going to be. I knew what the 10-inch sounded like, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it did start off as Duncan's baby. And I think it morphed into what we all put into it. But when I look back on Guilt, when I see pictures or if I see videos or I think about how I felt when I played, I mean, it is a snapshot of my insecurity and my pain and my anger. And, you know, when I was up there, I barely moved. Sometimes I would turn around and play with my back to the audience.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that vividly.
And I hate that I did that, but it's where I was. And I think that's part of, you know, maybe it's not a good showmanship thing, but I just think it plays into, I think we were authentically doing what we were doing.
Well, you weren't the band that we all went to be like, let's get all mosherific. I mean, Guilt was for the type of person who was into bands like Neurosis, bands like Amoebics, people who were looking for something that was a bit darker, a bit more intellectual, yet still brutal. And you guys delivered that. So if you would have your back turned and Duncan's eyes would be rolled into his head and he'd be screaming into the mic playing, it was authentic. You know what I mean? I could go to see, I'm not even going to name bands because I'm probably friends with some of them that did this stuff, but you know, like they were just, it was all about that, putting on that show, jumping around, doing backflips. And it's like, HR did it a long time ago and you'll never do it better than he did. So why bother? Find your own thing. You guys found your own thing and you did that thing well. You don't have to be the bad brains. HR and his brother and everyone else already did that. And they did it a million times better than anyone ever could. Find your own avenue. You found your own avenue. That's what kind of sticks out. But you know, kind of like hearkening back to that time period and you guys playing shows with Earth Crisis and Snapcase and all that, did you always kind of feel like you were that odd duck on the bill?
Always, for me. I mean, that's just me personally. Yes, I did. Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, we knew it. You know, with Snapcase, it was just like, well, like we love them as human beings, so we were like always excited to play with Snapcase. And Earth Crisis, we were like, okay, this is a weird pairing, but we'll roll. And originally it was going to be Strife, but their tour fell through, and we had known those guys. But then we hit it off with Earth Crisis, had a lot of fun. But, you know, Guilt was an interesting band in that on top of like our interpersonal sort of meltdowns and arguments and freezing each other out and all of this. I mean, there was one point, God, actually, remember we played that, our friend had us play a Christmas party at his house. And everybody's dressed up and we're playing. And it just, to me at that moment, I just felt like this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? Like, and I refused to sing. And Ashley and Kyle were just like not having it and like clowning me. And then I just shut down more and turned towards my amp, and I would play the songs without singing. And Kyle and I, for like a week, would only just pass notes to each other under the door, arguing about this, right? Like, but like we had that, but then we were just this weird cursed band, and it continues today. I hear you, buddy. Sorry, the kitty cat. Like every golden opportunity, for the most part, that would come our way, something crazy would happen, right? Like we would just somehow, like for the release of the re-release, there was a editor at Rolling Stone that was going to write a feature on the single, and it was, we were so excited, and so we got it all lined up. And then that day, Rolling Stone that morning let 3 of their editors go and pulled all their stories the day it was supposed to come out. And it's like, and I didn't even tell you guys about it because I was like, I might have a surprise for you, right? And
Just
I
kidding.
knew. Well, no, guilt is born under a bad star. But then there was just, we also were just not making wise choices sometimes. So like, this was like a random good thing that happened. We got a call from our friend who's actually doing the show right now, our new show. And he said, hey, Geezer Butler canceled the show opening for a band called Korn. Do you all want to open? And I had no clue who Korn was. And I said,
This was GZR, huh?
Yeah,
Geezer Butler's band GZR.
Yeah. And they said, because it was like an off date from the Aussie tour. And I said, they were like, it's sold out. And I go, yeah, we'll play. So we play to this Korn audience, and they loved us.
Of course they did. Of course they did.
Like, I got a call from the record store. They're like, what happened? All of your records sold out to the weirdest people. Yeah. And I still, like, I'll be somewhere and like somebody will come up and go, I saw you with Korn and bought your record and I love your band.
Yeah.
If we were smart, we would have just said, look, there's this whole world of metal. We should get on these shows. But instead, we're playing hardcore shows with kids that just like would rather drink Ovaltine than, see us up there, freezing each other out and me throwing my guitar.
Well,
I think you guys would have won out for sure, Ashley, because there was a vibe at that time period where music of that ilk would have certainly lent itself to the Deftones Korn thing, which people bemoaned then and are now pretty okay with. But I didn't mean to cut you off, so please go ahead with what you were saying.
No worries. All I was going to say is, like, I certainly don't want to stir the pot here, but I do remember, or poke the bear, or however you want to say it, but I do remember several times, and my approach was probably horrible because I was such a lovely person to deal with at the time, but I do remember saying to the band or mentioning, like, we're playing for the wrong crowd. And it was like just falling on deaf ears. And I was like, okay, fine. We'll keep playing hardcore shows in my brain. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm like, I love hardcore. Love it still. Yeah. But I knew that that's not where we needed to be playing.
Mm-hmm.
But
no, you absolutely told us. And we were like,
whatever. And it's not an I told you so thing. There was so much dysfunction that I had no way to like present that to make it like an effective conversation or I just felt it. That's all. I was like, this is just not the crowd we need to be playing for.
I think that's why like bands like one of our heroes, no matter how embattled they are, Neurosis, went on tour with Pantera back in the day, and then went on the first Ozfest as Earth Crisis had. Recognizing that yes, we come from hardcore, we love hardcore, but there's a whole world of different aggressive sounds and interesting sounds that we can, be a part of. And it's not a sellout. It's just bringing our ideas to a wider audience.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you with a great degree of certainty that in the bands I was in at the same time period that you guys were a functioning band, I would have said, no, fuck that. I'm a hardcore kid. I'm playing hardcore shows, and fuck those people. I know I would have said that shit because that's who I was. That's who I was.
It's funny because we, like our last tour that kind of broke up the band, and it ended a bunch of relationships that I had, very close relationships with the other band. Well, it didn't end it, but it damaged it for many years. And we had an agent, and it was supposed to be Bloodlet and Guilt. And an agent said, Bloodlet has got another tour. They're dropping this. Do you want to open for At the Gates? I had no idea who At the Gates were. And I said, no, we want to take our friend's band. And they really fought it. And eventually they dumped the tour. And I booked the tour anyway, because I really felt like I shouldn't let my friends down. And, but what was interesting is that tour that they got was Neurosis. And they came through town on that tour. And we had broken up. Ashley had moved to play with Ink and Dagger.
Yeah.
And Neurosis ends up staying at my house. And I was like playing them. They asked to hear something. They asked to hear a record, and I played it for him. And Steve was like, man, I wish we knew you existed. We'd take you on tour. And I was just like, no. Because I didn't know them back then. So like this was the first time then staying in my house, because I think London May couldn't host them. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, that was just always the case of Guild, is like, we just never synced in the right places.
I think by the time you guys had reached further, though, I thought you guys were getting closer to, kind of like that point where you were gonna like hit that next level, because like Synesthesia, beautiful concept, excellent 10-inch. Then you have Bardstown, which is this fucking juggernaut, which, piss takings aside, is a flawless record, like thematically and artistically. And then you come to Further, and then we get that last 7-inch after Further, and then it's just.
Yeah. And that 7-inch was post band.
It was,
yeah. We got back together and wrote those in a day to give out at the show.
I remember, because you gave me that 7-inch when I stayed at your place back in way back then.
I have to say that Further and the Bittersweet Blue 7-inch are my favorites. And I actually felt like as we were disintegrating, our music was coming to where it was going to be really genuinely where it needed to be or sit. I don't know. I felt like it was just starting to come together, but we were just completely falling apart. All of us. It's really interesting. And those are my favorites, Further and that 7-inch afterwards.
Yeah, it's undebated by people that was the record, right? Like, I remember, Ashley, you probably remember this too. I was playing the fest in Detroit with By the Grace of God, I think, and you were playing with Ink and Dagger, and the guys from Coalesce came up and they were just like, that record, that Further record, is the record we always wanted from you. And we were like, oh, wow, that's really nice. And I think you're right. I think Ashley's right. Even that last song on the record, not the piano one, but the dun, 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 that song was unfinished, right? Like, I didn't have lyrics. So of those, that's a little bit of a weaker one because we hadn't fully fleshed it out.
Mhm.
But like when we wrote those songs, we knew, like in that time, we knew that we were onto something. And the first couple were written with Kyle in the band, and the last couple, it was I think Weeder was in on those.
I think so.
And for a brief, and he'd be, stoked to finally hear it that it's mentioned in that conversation, I think, but because it gets glossed over. But that was a situation. That tour was like, man, Weeder and I, by the end of it, were like almost in fisticuffs, right? But I was just, man, I was in a bad space at that point. Like fully, that was where I was like, I need to make change as well. But that record, I wish we could have continued on that trajectory because we knew, we were like, okay, we found the perfect heavy, weird times and melodicness. We found that perfect place we'd been looking for. And I think with Bardstown, there's some songs on there where we were headed that way. I think Micron, even Theta.
Theta.
Like that weird, yeah. And then there were some old leftovers like Phi, the really long one that like now, like we were listening, it's just like, why is this 11 minutes long?
It works though. It works. There's something about it that just like in context makes a ton of sense, especially when you consider further, because you guys had basically, even though you were still playing hardcore shows, you'd abandoned the pretense of hardcore as a form and really embraced it more as the idea of what we all had gotten into it for in the first place, which is just, the idea that punk rock is a middle finger to form. It's about, conveying emotion. I think that's what you guys had done best. And that's why you made the best music at the worst possible times in your lives, because you were channeling turmoil.
I cannot disagree with that.
I thought you meant the band at first.
No, and John, I just saw John Gula 2 weeks ago.
You're like,
and
what?
No.
I was like, wait a minute.
What? We were?
Great dudes.
Oh, I love those guys so much. I love them. They're like our local heroes, as it were, but not as much as Starkweather. Starkweather are the local, like Eastern Pennsylvania heroes, but Turmoil's definitely up there. Starkweather is one of those bands that Guilt fit in with very well. Formless,
Did we play with them, and I feel like we played with them in Earth Crisis at Lost Horizon.
At the Lost Horizon, yeah, you did.
Oh yeah, I remember being there.
Yeah, sometimes there are just these outliers, Earth Crisis notwithstanding, they were great, but they weren't against the grain of that. They kind of like set the tone for that time period, really. Even though I think Chokehold did it better, Earth Crisis definitely were like a standard bearer for the zeitgeist of the time period. But it never kind of matched the same sort of subversive thought that bands like Guilt, Starkweather, Dead Guy kind of employed and made viable in our rarefied scene. That's kind of the part that I always sort of bemoaned about my own involvement in the hardcore of yore. It could be very codified and closed-minded. You guys escaped that. Even like Duncan before Guilt in Endpoint. Endpoint was never like preachy. That preachiness was a big turnoff for me.
Did you see Endpoint?
Yes, I did see Endpoint. And listen, Rob could be a little bit.
No, but he wasn't like didactic.
Never. He was never like
yeah.
that. No.
Yeah. No, sorry, I had to go there. Well, I think it's because I always loved like hardcore. Of course, I loved like Youth of Today and those kinds of bands. But Ashley and I came, like we pulled from the bands that those guys pulled from, right? Which were like, like Saccharine Trust, Black Flag, early Circle Jerks,
Faith.
Like Void, right? Like, and
fucking Void.
yeah, man, right? Like Battalion of Saints, these bands that weren't necessarily like all of them like right down the center, right? And I think the difference between a band like Earth Crisis and us is they were down the center of that metal hardcore. They were great at what they did. That's why they still draw. They had a message. And there were bands, I think that's the thing with Dead Guy and Guilt and even like his earlier band Rorschach, which were just mind blowing, right?
Fucking incredible, yes.
Not down the center, right? And it's easy to find success. It's easier to find success when you play down the middle. And that's, I don't begrudge anyone for doing it. There's lots of bands I love that are right down the center. But I don't think we were physically capable of doing that. I think Louisville is a weird town with an incredibly high suicide rate and addiction rate. It's a working class town. And we were raised by, we came into the scene that was run by a bunch of freaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a show, like, for example, with like, I think it was like Brain Dead, Maurice, The Uninvited, and Descendants. And if you said Maurice, which was like just straight up metal, like playing with the Descendants, right? Like that was 1984, 85. And that's just like, that was just a kind of scene. And when you go to a show that's just like, hardcore, that's kind of different shades of the same color. Yeah. It's very interesting. So whenever Endpoint would play New Jersey Fest, it was always fun, right? When we played Middlesex. But, the diversity wasn't as crazy wide. And now that I look back at the bill that we played in Middlesex, which was cursed because we came out ready to rage, and Andy Tinsley had tuned Matt Weeder's guitar to E. So we come out like ready to go, and we just, it sounds like shit. And we're just like, fuck, another time. We have just blown this. But that lineup now, people are like, oh my God, that was a lineup? It was like, Converge, Us, Daltonic, all these bands that like now people just, they can't believe those bands all played together. Yeah. But even that show was a little bit, it was like noisy hardcore metal.
I think now there's probably a better, I guess, sense of I don't know, like people just have a better idea of what bands that came from hardcore can be. I remember in the late 80s going to shows, and the first, like, I guess, emo core bands of that time period were starting to play shows in my area. And if you went to those shows, it was almost like sacrilege. Like, yo, you going to that melodic show? That's fucking melodic. Don't go to that. Don't go. What are you thinking? Like there was a serious, like, there was a blowback. But if a hardcore band and a straight metal band were playing together, no problem. You're good.
Yeah.
But it's that melodic thing that like for a very brief moment, not cool. You can't do that and still be accepted at the next, like 7-second show. You're not invited.
In 1998, I think that's when we played Your Town, is by the Grace of God played there. And we show up and we have no idea what the read is on this town. And there's just these two hardcore kids, kind of young, and they got like camouflage bandanas. And they're like, hey, how's it going? You guys here, you guys here for the scene? And da-da-da. We're like, and the kid goes, yeah. And they're like, what do you play? And we're like, I don't know, kind of like political, sort of melodic hardcore. And they're like, nobody's going to like you, man. This is a madball town. And we were like, not again. So that show was great. Right?
The show was awesome.
They're just two kids that happen to love madball, right? Like,
yeah.
But guilt, yeah, it's like Ashley said, we would roll up and go, oh God, they're gonna hate us.
Get ready to clear the venue out.
This is time for everybody to go buy their hoodies.
Yeah.
I thought it was actually, I don't know if this is really off top. It's related. When we did the Burning Fight thing and played up in Chicago, the exact same thing happened. Because you had bands like 108 and Ringworm and all these bands playing, and people were going nuts, and it was just packed in there. And Guilt gets on stage.
Yeah. It was,
empty room.
but the people who stayed there, right, were like these young kids, and they came up and they were like, "You guys sound more contemporary than anybody on this. Can we buy your records?" And we're like, "We don't even have records anymore." like Bardstown Ugly Box has been out of print since the 90s.
Yeah.
But that was always heartening. But but we had a lot of fun on that trip. Though.
Yeah.
We brought a buddy of mine, two buddies of mine from Denver. One of them is the front of house for Bonnie Bear, and he did our sound. And the other one was a guy I played with, Drew, and they played the drum intros. But it didn't matter. At that point, we don't care anymore, right? We're not like, oh, no, nobody cares. We were like, oh, we're playing the fucking Metro. This is fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, like, going into the venture of, 28 years later, re-releasing this, then, is there trepidation, I guess? Because, like, having this storied past and having been through, like, legitimately every possible scenario you can go through in the context of playing in the hardcore scene, revisiting, coming back, is there, like, I asked you about, like, the reinvigoration, but was there trepidation?
I think I didn't know if everybody would want to do a show, right? So Kyle and I think we all wanted a remix of this record, but Kyle and I had been kind of talking about it. And Kyle offered to finance the remix. And we said, just pay for it. And I said, okay. And so we talked, then we looped the band in, and I said, would you want to do a show? And I think everybody was like right away on board, because we had from that time, we'd had 2 shows that we played after the big breakup and really had great times and really got along because all the nonsense was gone, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's fun to get in a room with everybody, and because we're never in the same place, right? John is the man of mystery who knows where John is, and I'm way out here, and Kyle and Ashley are in drastically different circles in the world, and it's a chance for us to get together and like hug and play these old songs and go, oh man, how do we do this one? And I don't know. It's a lot of fucking fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are the stakes lower now too? Especially since like you've gotten to this point in life where, what you think of one another has drastically changed, and you're all just like kind of happy to see each other again. The stakes are a lot lower, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that because we're not living in that same space, we're able to actually enjoy each other and playing the music together that we made together. And so there isn't, it's not like, God, are we going to want to kill each other after this show or during the show when we play? Like, I mean, just even when we played down in Florida, it's a notable moment where Duncan and I were just like, rah! It's like I thought you were going to choke me while I was driving. I thought about it. And so there's not that angst and that it's just easier to enjoy and to look back at like, wow, look how different we are now. But this still means something to us. It's fun. It's not full of sour emotion. And I do think, and I don't know, it seems like you mentioned this before, Duncan. It is different in the sense that you almost have to like get yourself back in that headspace of where we were to make it feel the same. And that's kind of hard to do when you've, like for me, spent years in therapy trying to like repair all of those things that were going on. I mean, it's all still there. I remember it very clearly, but whether you choose to get back in that headspace or not to play, and it might come off differently now, but it's still fun. It's fun to be able to get together and enjoy each other and play that music together.
Yeah, I think what you said there is really true. Like Ashley and I are a lot more healthy mentally. We did a lot of work, to change her. I mean, the reason I left Louisville is I saw the writing on the wall. I was like, I'm going to kill myself. And I had made an attempt. And I said, all right, I'm leaving. And I went to graduate school and never came back, except for here and there. And I think, I was going to therapy and taking medication, and I tried to live a little better. And I'm able, I guess I've learned to channel that anger instead of it being what it was at the time of this abstract thing that was eating me alive. It was, I channel that anger. I think about things that make me mad now, like injustice and, inequality and things like that. I know that sounds really like, you're like, oh yeah, come on, hippie. But, because I don't, sure. I mean, depression never goes away, right? It's still there.
Yeah.
But I don't need to I don't think I need to coax it up and come Spectre, because I've got all of these other things that are going on in the world that I can say, okay, I'm going to locate myself in that and get a little angry so I can scream, which I can't do as well as I used to. But and it's really cool because, I'm not in a band right now, right? Like I've been a band all my whole life and now I'm not, which is like killing me. But during the pandemic, I bought this new beast over here, this Mesa.
Yeah.
And it has not gone very loud. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into Kyle's basement and uncaging it.
It almost seems criminal that it hasn't been unleashed, as it were. But there's something to be said about like all the three of us all share that same thing, that demon that is depression, and the three of us all learn to live with it to certain degrees. But you don't need to resummon that specific memory in order to inhabit a similar headspace, because it's never that far from you. It's how healthy you are in terms of how you disseminate these feelings that crop up continually. They never go away. It's about how you deal with the oncoming onslaught of emotional necrosis, almost these horrible things that our psyches conjure on a minute to minute basis. That's a depressive person, but someone who is equipped, like as it seems to me that the three of us have via therapy and life experience, have become more equipped to deal with. You can still hone it. You can still grab it if you need it, but you don't have to internalize it and ruminate anymore. And that's the beautiful thing here, because these expressions of dire circumstance and emotional horror, they're still there to be expressed to others, but you guys don't have to suffer it anymore. That's the beautiful thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's something. And like, if I can just touch back for a second, part of the reason why things go a lot smoother now, and I ask permission and I ask first with the band and everything that we function more. We have functioned more as a band since not being a band than we were as a band.
Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah. And that's, that changes a lot right away, because everybody has equity in the band. They don't feel like it's like the Kyle and Duncan show half the time, right? It's just, because these songs would be nothing without the bass and drums.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think I really even paid attention to how good Ashley's bass parts were until further, where I was like listening to a practice of us and I was like, holy shit, these bass lines are so good.
They're like modal. Your bass lines on Further are like modal jazz, Ashley. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, they were like, and I was like, I know, Ashley loves compliments.
I take them really well.
But that was the moment I was just like, and you were gone at the time, and I was just like, fuck, this person was in the band, and I didn't even notice this whole time, like how good these bass lines were for these songs. And this remix, just like Steve just brought that bass in, and it's got so much growl, and it's just, you're just like, wow, these lines even were like fantastic, and I think that's when you stop being a fucking band Nazi and you start moving as a team. You're able to not focus so much on yourself, and you're able to see like really the beauty in what you all are doing.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us get to really examine that until it's all in the rear view, though. You know what I mean? Like who really appreciates the band they were in high school, right?
Yeah.
Even though in high school you were inarguably having some of the best times of your life. Really.
Yeah.
You're young, everything's new and fresh and exciting and gorgeous. I remember the hardcore band I was in 1989, 90, 91. That was the best times of my life. I sucked. That was terrible at what I did. But in hindsight, when I listen to the cassette recordings of the practices and the abortive attempt to add a demo, I still feel the same way I felt. I'm transported by that, but just by the proxy of listening to an artifact of me as a young man. I get to re-inhabit that spirit and that emotion and that sense of wonderment. And I kind of almost would imagine that upon re-listening to this version of Bardstown, and I asked you before how it made you feel, but there has to be a wonderment somewhere in there too, just like to re-inhabit something and hearing it with fresh ears and a fresh mix, and it's almost like a new album.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know, it's hard to speak to it like that because we're so, I think, it is, but where I really get the sense of that is when people hear it and I don't ask them for their opinions, right? Like my friends.
You didn't
that
ask
have
me.
heard
You
it,
just sent
right?
it to me. You just sent
Yeah.
it to me like 9 months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, check this out. And every one of them had said, this sounds like a totally different record.
It's a
Your
different
band
album.
would have been treated so much differently if this would have been the record that came out.
Mhm.
Now, they could be biased because most of them are people who love Guilt anyway.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's yet to be determined if average guy that was around at the time and was into hardcore or metal would be like, this record rocks. I have no idea. But so far, I was really worried. I was worried are like people going to get upset about this remix, the way people are precious about their memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you, as a man of my age, and having been afforded a sneak peek by the better part of a year of that, you sent it to me. You're like, wait till you hear this. Just keep it to yourself. Listen to this. I didn't get precious about it. I was just reinvigorated with this. The number one, the sense memory of having first heard Bardstown Ugly Box, and then falling in love with it in a very different way because it is a full experience. It's almost like seeing The Wizard of Oz, but in 3D for the first time, or something like that. Something classic that is opened up in a different way. Like, I don't want to say when they colorized Night of the Living Dead, because that was a nightmare. But like something akin to that, like seeing the spider walk scene from The Exorcist for the first time when they finally reintroduced that into the cut. Just like, wow, this was intended. This is what it was going to be the whole time. How did we miss this? How did this not get offered to us way back then? I think I didn't get precious because it felt like a gift. I felt like Duncan let me in on a secret. That's what it really felt like. Like I'm in a special club. Like, wow, holy shit. No one else knows how good this could have been. And it was already good. I think that's how people are going to take it when they finally hear this, and the people who are going out and buying the vinyl, when they finally get to have it in their hands and drop the needle on the record and spin it, and it's going to blow away that comparative kind of thing where, like, this was my record back then. How could it be better? It's fucking better. It's just better, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank God there's freaks like you, man.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen. And there's not a ton. We didn't, it wasn't like we pressed 10,000 records or whatever. But they're like a few of the variants are almost sold out already. And it's been like just a few hours, which was just like, tickled me. It's not like back in the day where, you just assumed a record was going to sell 5,000, whatever. Now, very few hardcore bands sell a ton of records.
Unless you're Turnstile. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But then again, like Turnstile is like,
they're really good. They're really good.
They're doing their own thing, but this younger generation is really open to it. It's like you said, right?
Yeah.
And very few bands can do that, like I think Ceremony did it. I think they transitioned into the new thing. I think that, I mean, obviously Refuse did it.
Yeah. Do you remember how nuts we went for that album, Duncan, when it first came out? I was staying at your house when it just came out. We were going fucking nuts for that record. We were.
Yeah, like Dennis sent me a early copy of it. He was always so like, Dennis has always been such a sweetheart. And he sent it to me with a bunch of other bands that were from Sweden. He's like, you know, and I was just like, oh yeah, Refuse is going to be huge, right? Like they're going to be so big. But of course it didn't happen until after they actually broke up.
Sadly.
Which,
yeah.
I mean, they're doing all right now, right? But
yeah.
But I think, yeah, I mean, like, and it was such a great thing to work with Juan and Austin because, you know, they did my solo stuff, and I trust them.
Yeah, like Colony Collapse, what they did with the physical release was gorgeous, just absolutely, like Nietzsche and Holiday too. But that Colony Collapse 12-inch just looks impeccable. It's a piece of art.
I mean, they are record nerds, and they make records for making records. They're not like, they're not just mass producing. They make artifacts, and I'll take that any day of the week. You know, over somebody that just wants to make a buck.
You'd rather pay more for something from someone like that than a faceless corporation just milling out product that has no thought behind it.
Like record store day shit, you know, record store day.
I'm
shit.
so
like,
over that shit.
This rare Devo record. And it's like, look, I love Devo, but I don't need to buy that.
No, I have no personal connection to it. But when you look at, you know, what they've done with this release, there's a bonus 7-inch to it, and like these amazing variants. There's a serious dedication to the spirit of the form, and you can tell they love what they're doing, as they love it as much as I loved and still love that record. It's important, and as long as there's, you know, ears to hear it, and people who are willing to spend $35 on something that is not only prescient but will continue to reverberate. Look at how gorgeous that is. Look at that.
Like they got it right. He even put, I didn't do this. He did this. Black sleeve. Right. Yeah. You know?
That's how it's supposed to look, man.
I feel bad because Ashley hasn't gotten hers yet.
That's okay.
They're waiting till I get home, but
yes.
You know, you're right. Like it's having somebody that cares is a dream.
It looks better than the original. I have the original vinyl behind me. To me, that looks better. It looks more cared for, curated, appreciated.
Yeah,
we weren't going to get that from Tony Victory in 1995. It just wasn't in the cards.
You know, and this is another guilt thing, right? Like we did the mix, we would send it off, we're ready to go, and then two things happen. One, pandemic. Two, Adele and Harry Styles.
Adele and Harry Styles fucked it all.
Every person years back. And this is not a joke. They did.
No, it's the real fucking deal. Yeah.
It's the real story. Like all these pop stars, they're like, I have to have vinyl, screwed over all of these little, like even big independents, like Temporary Resonance, like
Revelation was waiting in the wings for Adele Records to get cleared out of queue so they could, you know, inarguably Revelation Records is a big label for hardcore, the biggest probably. They were waiting in queue forever because of Adele and Harry Styles records. That tells that's, to me, it seems a crime, but there's no getting around it. We're in the best time, in the best climate for physical media since the 90s. There's no, like, literally, no one was buying physical media for the past 20 years, really. Now all of a sudden it's fruitful, it's open, it's a thing again, you know? Look behind me, man. You know, they finally figured it out. And I'm here for it, you know?
Nate from Converge was busting my chops. He's like, man, why are you buying more gear, man? Just get a quilter and call it a day. You got to lug that thing around. And I was like, I know they use amps in the studio, but I'm like, I'll die on this. I want this artifact on stage. It makes me feel.
But here's the thing. You can have every filter and every like goofy computer trick on earth, but what do you think Jimi Hendrix would have sounded better on? A Fender Twin or a computer? A fucking Fender Twin, man. All day. Something with tubes in it, something that's analog, that has, gravitas, largesse, something that fucking moves air.
Mm-hmm.
A computer's not going to do that for you, baby. MIDI's not going to do that for you. But what's sitting right behind you is going to make people want to lose their fucking minds every time you play in front of them. That's the power.
Hashtag middle-aged people talking.
Are we middle-aged? I thought we passed that.
No, we're still middle-aged.
You might still be.
You youngster, you're still in your 40s.
I'm still in my 40s.
Yeah.
For another 3 years.
I'm not.
Yeah, that's when that 50 hits you, man. It's like
it's a doozy.
It's a moment where you're on the treadmill and you go, "Oh my God, I'm 50."
Well, here's the beautiful kind of like cosmic reset that I have in my life. I have a son that should be my grandson. I'm 47 and I have a 4-year-old son. What a shot of life that is,
I bet.
It keeps me young. I feel younger that he's in the world. I also feel like I'm never going to get to retire, but oh well, right? I will most assuredly die with my boots on, but for the best cause ever. So it's kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
But I get to pass all of this on to him. My daughter, who's in her 20s, she was into it when she was younger. Now, not so much. I'm really getting to kind of share my passion with this little guy in a very real way. I taught him to read when he was 3. He's been reading like almost fully for a year. He's involved. He's interested. He loves art. He loves music. He loves poetry. He loves everything that I show to him. He loves guilt. He knows who guilt is. He's heard guilt. It's a part of his life. That's, I think, the real kind of like coup of this. That you get, like, these are things that are going to outlive us all, and it's going to keep having a place in art and culture in perpetuity for as long as people want to be involved in it. But yes, I will let it go there. I love you guys. Your music has meant the world to me. I hope that we get another reissue. And I want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
All right, guys. I appreciate you, and have a great night.
You do the same.
All right.
Thanks.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
I want to thank Duncan and Ashley for coming on and doing this record release special with us. If you didn't really pick up from the last hour and 40 minutes of discussion, this record means a ton to me and to a good deal of my contemporaries. It's a masterpiece. Everything they did before was phenomenal, but this sparked what Guilt was to become. Like, they reached a potential with this album, and the record that followed, Further, really lives up to its name. That one, they're a fully realized entity at that point when Further comes out. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I certainly did. I hope you go over to Mind Over Matter and you buy the vinyl if you could. As a matter of fact, you can't. It's sold out. You missed your chance. I'm sure they're going to press another run of the vinyl. Hint, hint, Austin. Duncan and Ashley have been Guilt. I've been Peter. You've been beautiful. And this has been the Guilt Bardstown Ugly Box record release episode of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Take care of one another, people. We are all we have. Love to you all. Good night.
Stand.